Hello and welcome to Quick Learn Photography, straight to the point videos that teach you everything that I've learned in over 10 years of professional photography. I'm James, and in this video we're going to talk about Aperture Priority, and by the end of it you're going to know what it is and how to use it. Now if you don't know what Aperture is, then it's best that you watch a previous video that I did on it, because it's really, really important to actually know what Aperture is. So a quick breakdown of it is how much light the lens lets in to the sensor. So it controls light. It's part of the exposure triangle that helps with exposure. So you've got shutter speed, aperture and ISO. They all control how much light goes in and how bright or dark you want the image to be. So here's aperture, here's a lens, and if I open the aperture up, there it is. It goes wide and then low. That's a low aperture and wide aperture. And so that's what aperture is, and it will sort of, you can control that to how much light is coming into the sensor. Now it has another effect as well. It's how much is in, it's called shallow depth of field or bokeh. So say you focus on me and you wanted the background more blurry, then the wider the aperture, the more effect that will have. Or if you want everything in focus, perhaps you're doing a photograph in a living room or something, you want everything in focus, then you'll adjust the aperture the other way. I'll get into that more in a minute. So why would you use Aperture Priority? Why is it so handy? And it is really, really handy, and professionals use it all the time. I use it all the time in the right circumstances. I use it quite a lot actually. Why would you use Aperture Priority, and why is it? So once you know how to use Aperture and what it does, sometimes you don't want to worry about the other settings. Say you're doing events, you're documenting something, and you're just quick firing, getting really fast images. The one thing you want to focus on by choice is aperture, okay? So you want to set it to aperture priority and you just control the aperture. So it is an automatic mode, but it's not going to control the aperture. You're going to control it. But all the other things like shutter speed and ISO, it's going to control. So you'll set it to aperture priority. So if you look on one of my cameras here, if it'll go to it, here, sorry. There, it's set on the A. So you've got M, A, S and P. So A stands for aperture, M stands for manual, and I've got it an aperture priority now. So I control the aperture and not worry about the rest. So why would you want to control aperture? Obviously, it's how much light it lets in. So if you're doing a lower light sort of scene, you're going to want it at its lowest aperture, so it keeps the ISO down as much as possible. But sometimes you want that shallow depth of field effect as well. So you want to really isolate the subjects and have the background blurry. It's called bokeh. You might have heard of that term. So you control the aperture. Say you've got a prime lens. I'm going to get into prime lenses, what they are. You can have a really wide shallow depth of field like this one. So you can have it really wide. That's at f1.8. And you might choose that. So that way the background or whatever's behind the subject would be really, really blurry, and that's the look you want. Sometimes you'd want it the other way. So you're doing something where you want more in focus, the whole thing in focus, or a larger subject in focus, or whatever it is. It might be a row of people for a big group shot and they're all staggered and you want everyone in focus. So that way you wouldn't have it really, really wide. You would have it perhaps in the middle a bit more. That's called shallow depth of field. So you're in control of that. Let's say you're doing a wedding, you're photographing a wedding, for instance, and it's nice to have that blurry background and really isolate the subjects for portraits and that. So you might be running, gunning, walking around on aperture priority, not worrying about shutter speed, not worrying about ISO, because the automatic mode is doing that, which is great. And you can control it up and down with exposure compensation as well. Again, did a video on that. Exposure compensation, really, really important with any of these modes like aperture priority. So you're running and gunning, isolating the subject, say f2.8, everything looks really blurry and portrait-like and lovely, blurry in the background, not the focus. But then you've got a big group shot, or there's a big group of people doing something, and you don't just want one person in focus, you want everyone in focus. So then you would notch it down to say f7, f8 or something like that, where more is going to be in focus. Then you turn around again, I'm just talking about a wedding scenario here, and then you see something where you really want the subject to pop, so then you'll notch it down again to f2.8. Now while you're doing this, running around, adjusting the aperture to what you want, you don't have to worry about the other settings like shutter speed and ISO, because aperture priority means all you're focused on, all it's going to let you control is the aperture. So I think it's best that I show you on the back of the camera aperture priority, how it works, and it's probably something that I use most of the time. So when I'm out and about, if I'm not using lighting or flashes or studio lights or anything like that, I use aperture priority most of the time. It's fantastic, it really, really is. So let's have a look at the back of the camera and I'll show you how it works. Okay, so we're in aperture priority, the A there, I've set that. So let's look at the back of the camera now. Here we go, let's check that's in focus. Yep, right, so we're in aperture priority. Okay, you can see the auto ISO flashing there. Brilliant. Now, one thing you're going to notice, I'm going to explain why in a minute, is the shutter speed will not drop below 200th of a second. So if you're thinking that's a bit odd while I'm demonstrating this, bear with me, I'm going to explain that in a second. That's a deliberate thing that I've done. So aperture priority is where all you care about now is the aperture. So we're at f2.8, let's say you've got an entry level lens, f3.5. See, the ISO's dropped up just a little bit. The ISO is there, so it's on auto ISO. So all you have to worry about is the aperture and nothing else. So you can see the ISO jumping around there. I'm adjusting it with my front dial on the Nikon here. Let's say you wanted more in focus. Let's say go to f5 and look at the ISO moving up. It's kind of helping you out there. It's saving you the hassle of having to adjust the ISO to keep the exposure. You've got the exposure locked, but you're just controlling the aperture. Let's say you're doing something like landscape, and you wouldn't probably be on an auto mode for this, or aperture priority, but just for demonstration purposes, we're at f11 here. That's not letting in a lot of light because the aperture has shrunk down, and the ISO is helping out by whacking it up to 5000 ISO. Okay, now on full frames that's not a problem. On crop sensors it's okay, but this kind of high ISO can start looking really bad if you've got a smaller sensor camera. Okay, I'm going to do a video on sensor size soon. So let's get it back down. Let's say f5.6. That's a nice sharp aperture. That will get, you know, quite good for portraits, get everything in focus, the whole person, head, shoulders, everything. Whereas if we go to f2.8, then a portrait, you know, the ears would start getting out of focus and things like that. So you get the idea. Now, why is it not dropping below 200th of a second? That's because in the menu settings, I've set it to not go below 200th of a second. So I just find that as a really, really good thing when you're doing quick fire stuff like aperture priority. So all it's going to adjust is the shutter speed and the ISO, but when it gets to 200th of a second, I don't want it to get it any lower than that. It's all in your menu systems, every camera's different. I don't want it to get any lower than that because I want to capture movement, general movement like walking, head movements, gesturing. Then the ISO will kick in after that. So if we go to exposure compensation and raise it up, down, sorry, here we go. So the ISO is nearly at base level, 100 ISO, and this is quite ambient. Now this is using exposure compensation if I wanted ambient. Okay, do you remember exposure compensation? Let's get it back up to say -7.7, sorry, and the ISO is helping out there. It's just nudging it up a little bit, and we can make it brighter or darker. Look at the ISO even higher, and so on and so on, using exposure compensation. But all I'm controlling here is the aperture, and the ISO is helping out. And if you think the ISO is making it too bright, go to exposure compensation and dial it down a bit. Then you can carry on changing the aperture and it'll just stay a little bit darker. Okay, so if you're doing like low light ambient stuff and you want to keep that atmosphere but juggle around with your aperture, then that's great. If I didn't have the shutter speed set, then the shutter speed would start dropping rapidly as well, the darker it gets, but I don't want that to happen because I want to capture movement. Okay, so that is aperture priority. So I hope that helps. I hope you understand what aperture priority is and how it works and how it can be so useful. So you can just focus on the kind of look that you want to get when it comes to that shallow depth of field, and also how much light you want to let into the image. So practice with it. You know, have a go, set it on. Every camera might be different with Aperture Priority, but it'll always have a symbol with an A or something like that. Have a go with Aperture Priority, practice, and you'll really get the hang of it. And if you're doing any kind of documentary photography or quickfire stuff, then it really is helpful. So thanks for watching, and I hope it helped.